The NBA's biggest talking point right now isn't undefeated teams in Cleveland and Oklahoma City, or wobbling contenders in Milwaukee and Denver. It's a locker room altercation that took place between Joel Embiid and a member of the media, which the league is investigating. To be clear, what Philadelphia Inquirer columnist Marcus Hayes wrote was completely uncalled for. In a column criticizing Embiid's conditioning and availability, he made reference to Embiid's son Arthur, who's named after the younger brother Embiid tragically lost in a car accident 10 years ago. Essentially, Hayes insinuated that by failing to suit up due to injury, Embiid is failing to live up to the legacy he wants to leave behind for his son and by extension his deceased brother. No wonder Embiid was incensed, which led to the confrontation that reportedly ended with the big man shoving Hayes. Any of us would feel the same way, but no matter how low someone stoops in what they say or write about you and your family, it doesn't mean you can put hands on them without consequence. If that's what happened, I can't see how Embiid avoids a suspension, lest the NBA wants to set a dangerous precedent. And that's where the unfortunate irony comes in. The original point Hayes was trying to make, one that he went about arguing in terrible fashion, mind you, is that Joel Embiid isn't available enough for the Philadelphia 76ers. In responding to that comment, Embiid has put himself in a position where he'll likely miss more games for a Sixers team that can't afford for him to be on the shelf any longer than his knee has already demanded. And with that, welcome to the Unfiltered Show, presented by Under Armour and Curry Brand. I've got the new Curry 12 Gravities on. Great mix of style and comfort. Everyone at the arena was loving them when I wore them the other night. Guests today, Will Liu, co-host of the Hello and Welcome pod. JD Bunkis, who hosts 2 hours of radio on Sportsnet 590 in Toronto, or in Canada, Canada-wide. Monday to Friday, you can listen to that. You can listen to the Hello and Welcome pod, wherever you get your podcast. Guys, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be here.
What's going on, man? Great shoes.
Yeah.
They were raving about them down at Scotiabank Arena, man. It was the talk of the town.
I would have been more incentivized if there was like free pairs for us as well.
Yeah.
This would have been a much better promotional vehicle.
We'll see what we can do about that. We'll see what we can do about that.
No one even talked about Vince Carter getting his jersey retired. It was just Cash's shoes, man. Excellent stuff from Steph Curry's brand.
Well, we'll get right into the reason, I did that monologue there, and a topic I'm going to get into with Yaron Weitzman later too, but the Joel Embiid versus Marcus Hayes thing was all the talk this weekend. Will, you mentioned the Vince Carter game in Toronto. The end of that night featured all the reporters in the media room there talking about what the heck just happened between Joel Embiid and the reporter, because first the report was he punched him, then it was scaled back that he shoved him. I want to get both of your guys' takes on this because, we're all in the media industry. We've all been to the arenas. We've all had to talk to athletes. We'll start with you. Listen, you've had NBA players not like things you said or tweeted before. We can be open about that. Now, you've never stooped to the lows of Marcus Hayes.
No.
But what are your thoughts on everything that's gone down here? Like, Joel Embiid have a right to do what he did? Did he take it too far? What are we talking about here?
I think, first off, Marcus did go too far. You just never mentioned anyone's family in any context. And, of course, when that happens, there's always going to be some repercussions. Having said that, though, Embiid obviously has way more to lose. He is the face of the Sixers. He is one of the faces of the NBA. He just can't do this. And that's where, there's obviously, we support you. You're maybe even morally correct. But, you just can't be doing that. And that's where I was reading another Philadelphia 76ers columnist who sort of reported on the situation because everyone was there. And apparently the Sixers front office with Daryl Morey and also Elton Brand actually pulled Marcus aside afterwards, had a conversation with him. And no matter sort of what was discussed, one of the conclusions was just that was unacceptable by Joel Embiid. And they did apologize to Marcus for that turning physical. Now, ultimately, you know what? It's still a little bit slimy. I think the whole situation's bad. If you read the whole column, he called him fat 2-3 times, which was pretty rare in today's day and age. It maybe speaks to Philadelphia having a very unique media market as well. But the whole situation, you got to draw a line. I think Embiid probably will be suspended 1 or 2 more games, which will be very ironic because again, that was the whole point. He can't miss more games.
Yeah.
I think, what's this guy's last name again?
Hayes.
Marcus Hayes. I'd never heard of him before this incident because it seems like he's a shot columnist, right? Which is, listen, I'm not someone who's afraid of a hot take. I've been known to have many. But there's clearly a line, and I think that most people know what that line is. And if I was anybody, that should be disappointed in this, it's his editors. That's what you're paid to do.
Right.
The hot take guy is going to bear the brunt of this, but I can't really understand how It's a paper. It's the Inquirer.
Yeah,
like
Philadelphia Inquirer.
So I'm not really sure how the editing room ended up letting that one go through without a couple of checks being like, hey, this is probably not going to fly, especially in today's, like you guys know this, with the way that teams are. And they've got way more of their fingerprints on what media does. They do try and protect their players. And so I just thought this was like a huge screw up to me from basically everybody involved.
Yeah.
And like, again, I understand someone trying to like have a position. I get that there are columnists and, members of like different types of older media that have tried to stay relevant by being like, we're the ones who will be the most critical, like new media is soft. Sure. We're going to be hard as fuck. Oh, wait, can you swear? No. You're going to be hard as hell. Edit that out. Sorry. But this is ugly. The problem is like, I think it's got to be more than 2 games. Like you said 1 to 2, you shoved a guy in a locker room. There was multiple witnesses. Like when you're talking about that precedent, Joe, like I don't know how you can just say that this is like a minor slap on the wrist because like this guy, if he wanted to go that route, technically, depending on how violent it was or how vicious it was, he can press charges against you. He can sue you. So I think the league's probably going to come down stiff. The question is like, how do you suspend a guy who is hurt?
Yeah, because the Sixers already have, let's just say, miscommunicated when it comes to Joel Embiid's injury. Like, what is stopping them from saying, "Oh, he's cleared to play now"?
Yeah.
When they know he's a couple of games away, so that then the suspension covers that, right? But yeah, I think the precedent part is like an important conversation to have because again, like no one I've seen is defending the way Marcus Hayes went about writing that column. Like the general point of it of like, hey, he's not available enough. I don't think his condition, like that's fair game. You're a columnist. This guy's a professional athlete, but no one's defending the way he went about it with the reference to his son and his deceased brother. However, like we've been saying, like, people say, I'm sure people have said stuff about all of us online. Now, not to that degree. I'm not saying we face the same criticism of a professional athlete, but in media, people say stuff about you all the time, whatever. If you see that person in public and you put hands on them, you would be in trouble, whether legally or, financially, whatever. You just can't do that. And especially in the position Joel Embiid's in, you can't do that. And again, even if we don't agree with that guy wrote and we think, hey, he might have had it coming to him, for the NBA to not suspend him, what kind of precedent is that sending? Where they're essentially saying, hey, if you write something bad enough, if you say something a player really takes offense to, they actually have a right or like they have free reign to like physically confront you. Like we know the NBA is not going to allow that to happen, and Adam Silver is not going to let that precedent be set. And so a suspension has to be coming, right? Like,
you think it'd be different if they had video of it, like a Ray Rice situation? Like again, I'm not equating the two. Ray Rice.
I don't think I don't think this guy was seriously hurt. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
I think Embiid did have the restraint. It probably was just a push more than anything else.
Still, Joel Embiid is a 7-foot human being.
Yes,
like,
no,
he
for
shoves
sure.
you. You're an out of shape newspaper columnist.
I've seen him injure other NBA players.
Yeah, like
at least 5 off the top of my head.
Yeah. Why I was asking about the video is like, I wonder if it's like a very light shove, does that let him get off the hook? Like the fact that we don't have this video, I wonder who it actually, if it makes it better or if it makes it worse for him.
Another thing I think is interesting because I've seen some people say that the Sixers, like, they shouldn't even have credentialed this guy. Like, they should have known this was an issue. They shouldn't have credentialed. Here's actually why I have a problem with that.
I mean, come on.
Because one of the things people will often say when someone takes a shot like that at an athlete is, oh, well, it's easy to do that behind a keyboard or whatever. You don't actually have to face them. You're not on the beat. You're not whatever. So while I definitely don't respect what Marcus Hayes wrote, the fact is he did actually show up to the arena knowing that Joel Embiid took exception with it, knowing that Joel Embiid called him out in the rant the day earlier when he was saying, I've done too much for this city to be treated like this. He was reacting to that column and even made a reference to the fact Marcus Hayes wasn't there. So I actually don't hold any of this against the Sixers for credentialing the guy because, again, I think it's fine that he then has to face the music from being face-to-face with a guy, maybe having to explain his situation, whatever the case may be. I think it's also a dangerous precedent for teams to start saying, oh, well, our star player really didn't like what you wrote or said last night, and so we actually can't credential you tonight because he might be too upset.
Removing access.
Right.
I mean, that's also how NBA-wide policies are going. So,
fair enough.
I think that this wouldn't be that. I mean, look, this isn't the first case of someone getting a bad column written about them, and there's been hundreds, maybe thousands of instances of this in the past with lots of other players, and Embiid actually crossed that line. They both crossed the line. Like, there's obviously fault on both sides.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, yeah, obviously for the Sixers, it's way more impactful if Embiid gets suspended versus, like, no offense, but just a random columnist. Like, I don't even think people would have read this column if this whole situation didn't blow up like this. And inadvertently, it actually backfired, and we'll see sort of what the next column is, because I'm now eagerly awaiting Marcus Hayes' column.
You know, you raised a good point though, Cash, about like this felt like it was festering before. No,
Yeah.
like this was before the column, like the whole rant that he gave and he delivered, and the feeling that he was being questioned, and the frustrations with the injury, and like the talk in Philadelphia. This does feel like it kind of had a boiling over effect, and so we're just doing a lot of lawyer talk around here, like a lot of precedents. But it is true. Like, I would hate to see a world where we start to see more of what you're talking about. Like, we're already seeing NFL locker rooms tighten up. They want to have it so that reporters can't get inside, that they're going to go to like designated spaces.
Sure.
But part of all of this is for fans. Like, you don't go in those locker rooms for yourselves. You're going to those places and those spaces because you feel like there is a value to convey to fans. And so to have a trickle-down effect where it actually impacts other people who are doing great work, other people who are servicing your fan base, one that seems to be in decline if you're basing the like ratings off of or you're taking any value at that. I don't see how you can have something where you're tightening up the restrictions and pulling guys out of it. I think what you have to do maybe is, if there is an incident like that, offer up the opportunity, if the player does want it, to have that like discussion in private with the journalists, so that it's not just a circus with everyone else around. But actually also the thing you're probably going to learn now is that, unfortunately, you got to have security present, because that's going to be you presenting your due diligence.
Right. No, it's a messy situation all around, which only highlights, a very messy start to the season for the shorthanded Sixers. So let's shift to happier stuff and talk about, never mind, the Milwaukee Bucks.
Oh, I was going to say, happy?
One of the 5 teams who, like the Sixers, currently rank bottom 10 on both ends of the court. Think about that. A team with Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard on it. Okay, I know Chris Middleton's been hurt, but come on.
Yeah.
A team with Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard on it is 1-6 with a bottom 10 rating on both ends of the court. That is abysmal. Diagnose what the heck is going on in Milwaukee.
It's a lot of things going wrong. It really is. I mean, obviously, Giannis being out for the last game doesn't help. Playing Cleveland, who are red hot, 8-0 to start the season twice in a row, doesn't help. 2 narrow losses against them. But I also think that, like, for the Bucks in general, you look at that roster, it is not good. It is either just like 30-year-olds who are just like a little bit too old to sort of like play a huge consistent role, and then young guys or random minimum guys who are not suited to play in a bigger expanded capacity. It's just a roster that's just not quite good. Like, you look at it, it's like, okay, we got to buy low on Gary Trent Jr., got to buy low on DeLon Wright, Taurean Prince. Guess what? They're buying low for a reason. You know what I mean? Like, none of those guys are guarantees. Like, maybe on paper you say, like, they have some track record. Those guys aren't it. And then the young guys, I know that a lot of Bucks fans are like, well, Doc got to go with the young guys. I saw the last game. They played the young guys. Down the stretch, it was AJ Green. It was Andre Jackson. Guess what? Andre Jackson does nothing offensively. And yes, he's there for pressure defensively. But if you evolve a screen in the NBA nowadays, you're probably switching. So it's not that hard to get one great defender off the court. Also, he's not a great defender just yet. Like, it's closer to like Matisse Thybulle. And then AJ Green is just like one of these 6'2" guys who shoots the 3. Like, it's just, man, the roster is just not that good. And right now, what they got to be worrying about is Dame's balling. Like, okay, he had a really quiet game against Memphis. He responded in a big way, like 80 points in the next 2 games. It's still not enough. He hit 11 threes and it wasn't enough. Like, man, it's tough. And then the funniest thing watching Bucks game is when the camera pans over after like a bad play, and it's just Doc with his hands on his knees. And like, imagine you're the courtside guy sitting right behind. You're getting courtside tickets you paid probably hundreds of dollars in Milwaukee, let's be honest. And then all you see all game is just Doc mooning you the whole game as your team loses. It's all bad, man. It's all bad.
JD, I know you've been, based on our text conversation last night, you've been licking your chops waiting to talk Bucks and Doc Rivers. So
yeah, I don't have any love for Doc Rivers. I like seeing the downfall. Like, I really do. Especially the way he handled taking the job, which I thought was very strange.
Right.
And like the whole, just the entire thing about it just kind of rubbed me completely the wrong way. Again,
he was the advisor to the Bucks. He was a mentor to Adrian Griffin. All of a sudden, Griffin gets fired and he gets hired. And it's like,
and he was like, I had no idea this was going to happen, and that I didn't want to do it. But also chance to coach Giannis, I was like, okay, man, this is just it's too much.
Yeah.
You guys ever do a fantasy auction draft?
Yep.
You know when you accidentally spend too much of your budget on a couple players up at the top and you're just sitting around the draft and you have no control over anything and you're just waiting? And you're sitting there, you're like, okay, I don't get to pick any players. I'm just going to have to take whoever is left over. That's the Bucks. It doesn't feel like there's a plan when I look at the roster. It's like I think it's 57% of their cap space is tied up in Dame and Chris Middleton. And so it's like, okay, you've got those two guys. You've got Giannis. I actually thought the Brook Lopez contract was going to age poorly. That's actually not an issue for them whatsoever. It's just that the rest of the team, like you mentioned all those names, dude. There was a couple guys on the Bucks like I had to Google. I was like, I don't know who you are. Like, sorry, what school did you go to? I'm not aware of. Like, oh, you went to like I've never heard of this school as like a Div 1 program before, like a major school, and yet you went there and you're on the Bucks and you're playing major minutes. Okay, they just look thrown together. It doesn't seem like they had a vision for it. Like, say what you will about the Raptors' latest like screw up with Project 6ix9ine. At least Masai had an idea of something that he wanted. This team just looks like a random collection of what you could get when you could get it. The DeLon Wrights, the Gary Trents, the AJ, what is it, Green? He's not not the receiver, but a white guy who shoots threes. All right, I guess. Like it's just a scatter shot collection of players, and I think the misread here is like, sorry, but a lot of this does fall on Giannis Antetokounmpo because he was looking at the old NBA. What we're learning is that you need to have depth. You need to have a bunch of credible players around you. And you're seeing that with, like, right now with Denver, which is a team that's struggling to beat a Raptors team that's shorthanded. That is, like, genuinely flooring bench units that I'm looking at the Raptors playing basically G League guys and saying, you're even here. And you're looking at this Bucks roster, and it feels the same way where not a lot of these guys look like everyday NBA players. They basically went all in to have a star tandem, a quote-unquote big three or big four, depending on how you view Lopez, and it's just the game has moved on from that. That's just not enough to be a title contender, even if you do have someone as great as Giannis. So I don't see a fix. I don't see a move. I don't think that you can move Middleton. I don't know how you possibly move Dame at this point before you move Giannis, like how he would ever buy into something like that. And then what other trade pieces do you have? Like, does Pat Connaughton carry some value I'm unaware of? They don't have any moves. So they're poorly coached, they're poorly put together, and yeah, they've got also two stars that, frankly, like you mentioned Dame's ballin'. When I watch those two guys play together, it's like they have no chemistry.
Which is insane because like skill-wise,
you'd think.
There's a reason when they made that trade, they became, if not the championship favorite going into last year, 1A, 1B with Boston, because the way those guys' skills were supposed to coexist and overlap was supposed to be perfect. Like, going into last year, we were just talking about, Dame Giannis pick and roll. Like, this is going to be an unstoppable tandem. And then it was like, well, Dame, he had issues like off the court and injury stuff, and that's why it didn't work last year. It's been worse this year. Yeah. Right. Now they've had a full training camp with Doc. It still sucks. And here's why they're boned more than any other team. And you were kind of touching on this with like the no assets thing, the no tradable pieces. Like, look at like the three teams I guess you would say there's most concern of. I forget the Clippers because we already know that they're boned. But like, so say between,
I'm not concerned.
Yeah, the Bucks, the
I'm
Sixers.
Don Draper. I don't think about you at all.
Yeah, they don't even exist. The Bucks, the Sixers, and the Nuggets are the three teams that I'd say are like the most concerning to start the year. The Sixers can at least say, well, hey, we haven't had our MVP, and our second or third best player has been out for all but one game. The Nuggets can say, we still have the best player in the world. Jokic, I don't think, is ever going to ask out of Denver. And at the very least, their struggling is barely getting by these other teams and still having a winning record because of Jokic. The Bucks are 1-6 with their two best players playing all but one game together, with no tradable assets, unlike the Sixers, no young talent whatsoever. Like, is Andre Jackson their best young player and he can't even play?
Come on,
and
man.
like you mentioned, when he does, it's not moving the needle. No first-round pick that they control themselves till 2031. Chris Middleton hasn't even played yet. He's older. Like, he just had multiple ankle surgery. Both ankles were surgically.
He's not the same guy.
Right.
You can't rely on him.
Lopez is fine for his age, but he's getting up there. It's a very creaky roster with no end in sight, or like no light at the end of the tunnel. And a guy in Giannis who, if you've kind of been reading the tea leaves and looking at what he said the last year or so, very different from the guy who early in his career just seemed like it's not my job, let the front office do it, I don't want to be coach. He's very much now the superstar who realizes, he talked about them not having an identity last week. Like, this is like a 5-alarm fire there, which leads me to my last Bucks question.
Yeah.
Do you guys actually see him like asking out suit, or do you just not think that's in his DNA?
No, absolutely. I think Giannis.
Yeah, I agree.
Giannis
I think it's already
is like most superstars nowadays, where he is interested in building his own legacy, you know, and like you look at all the other stars, unless you make it a good situation like Golden State has for Steph Curry, for the most part. Obviously, Golden State's had some up and downs, but like unless you make it a good situation for them, they're going to take their own career into their own hands. Like I think Giannis might have a no trade clause too, so he actually has like full say over sort of this whole situation. The funniest thing is, if he ends up going to Miami, Dame's got to be so pissed at Giannis. He's like, yo, that's where I wanted to go.
Yeah.
I was a divorced man. I want to go to Miami to be single, like, and play a great brand of basketball. Everything was set up, but of course they didn't get it done. That's the only way out of this. Like, this whole current situation doesn't work. The team is so unathletic. The team is so old, and then their like point of attack defense is so creaky. Like, there's no way you're getting out of this, and it's not like you have a great system with a coach in place that can like get everyone coached up. That's not happening with Doc. So, yeah, I mean, you can actually get yourself out of this by obviously recouping assets. You could probably still get a lot for Dame right now. Probably not 100 cents on the dollar of what you just paid for, but maybe 80 cents. The Dame's still Dame.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's tough.
No, it's
Who wants to pay a ton for Dame though?
Miami. We'll just call Miami again.
But like, yeah, so you call and you both spots. They don't have two Tyler Heroes.
even that though. Like even Miami, like
Tyler Hero and AJ Green together. My goodness.
even
man.
Miami,
Body swap.
like Will, we talked. I think it was on your show when with you and Alex. I
Yeah.
came on and we talked about how Miami is like interesting to monitor as well because I don't think they even believe anymore that they're a contender. Like that's probably why they're
Sure.
not going to extend Jimmy. So I don't think they're making that trade that they would have made a year and a half ago for Dame now.
I just don't know what they give up, but yeah. So what was the list? Did you guys see that report? It was the Clippers, weirdly.
For that Giannis would want to go.
Yeah,
to,
it was
or
like the teams that Giannis would accept a trade
it's like
towards.
it was like Nets.
Yeah, so
It was like weird. Yeah.
if you go to the Nets and Clippers, I don't even know what to say anymore. It's
He
like
wants to go to the ugly stepsister of the two big city like teams.
Well, I wondered when I saw that list if this has anything to do with the fact that Giannis sort of painted himself into a corner with when he won his championship, talking about doing it the right way. Like this is like a lot of people have made the insinuation that Golden State would be the right fit, and that's been something for a while,
Sure.
right? Like
Yeah,
he likes
yeah.
the Warriors,
Yeah.
he likes the culture that they have there.
Yeah, sure.
It's pretty clear that would be a great extender of Steph Curry's career. They've got a bunch of assets that I don't particularly love. Like I didn't like them in a Pascal Siakam trade, so I certainly don't love them in a Giannis Antetokounmpo trade. That being said, if you go there, you're not going to face the same level of KD, clearly, because it's like they were at the very top of the planet, and KD got beat by them. There's all this different stuff. But I also think that some of the math doesn't change in terms of whose titles those get to be, even if he is the best player. It's still always Steph's team.
Yeah.
And so for him to have been so bold and him to be so serious about his, I did it the right way, all these guys are trying to make super teams, you're going to go jump on someone else's bandwagon? Like, you're going to try and force your way to where? Like, Dallas and go play with Luka? You're going to try to force your way to go and play in Golden State and be on Steph Curry's team? Like, it kind of does feel like the best destination for him. Like, that's why the Nets thing sort of made sense, because I'm like, okay, you could go there, and then they could package a bunch of the other stuff together and try to build something around you where it feels like yours. They're going to have to use a bunch of those pieces to get you as well, though. So I just, like, every time I try to think of the Giannis trade, I don't know how it fits with what we've learned about this player in terms of like what he's interested in, but also the place that actually has the assets and the timeline that makes sense for him. Like it just seems ugly all around. Like it just doesn't seem great.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think he's learned what a lot of superstars end up learning, where it's like early in their career, it's very easy to be like, I'm going to be a one-team guy, or like, no, I'm not the superstar that's going to force my way out. But then when they actually start going through what a lot of superstars go to, and it's like, oh, there's not really a path for me to continue contending here, they become like almost any other superstar who's like, hey, there's championships I need to win for my legacy or for whatever reason, and then you realize, like, not in a bad way, but they're all the same in that way. Like it's very rare. Like I mentioned Jokic, he might be the only one where I actually could not see him asking out. The rest of, pro sports stars, for the most part, want to win. Even the ones that you think might only be about money or whatever, they want to win. And if they don't see a path back to contention, it's going to get ugly. We saw that, segue here, we saw that in Toronto, right? Where the Raptors had this great run. And I think everyone thought, like whether it was Masai Ujiri, the front office in general, had this Midas touch. Oh, it'll never go wrong.
Yeah.
There are cycles. Eventually, you kind of have to start from scratch again or close to it. Kind of what the Raptors are doing now. Record-wise, I think it's what we expected through, 8 games of a very tough schedule, or 2-6. But I would say entertainment-wise and in terms of like providing hope, that you can sell, I'd say they're a little ahead of where I thought they'd be 8 games into this season. Will, I mean, you talk about the Raptors every day. What are your general thoughts on the first 8 games, 10% of the season? Are you with me, or are you still think, no, they're very far away?
No, I think it's very encouraging. Like, you got to consider the Raptors. Not only are they 2-6, but like they've had a really difficult schedule to start, and they've also had a lot of injuries. Like, this was a team that spent a lot of time together in the summertime. It was like, okay, these young guys got to hit the ground running, and those young guys were Scotty Barnes, Emmanuel Quickley, RJ Barrett. All three of those guys have all suffered injuries already. And, you know, Scotty's, I think, the longest way away. I think he's probably going to be back in like 2-3 weeks. So they haven't even played together just yet. Like, this team is getting by every night. Their first option right now is RJ Barrett in a pick and roll with Jakob Poeltl, which honestly, like, when you compare to most offenses around the league, that's not necessarily like going to make you, you know, tremble in fear. And then your second option is Gradey Dick. And all of a sudden, though, it's actually working. Like, offensively, they're actually doing really, really well. Defensively, they foul everybody. They concede the most free throws in the league, basically. You know, defensively, I think there was a big focus on let's improve the defense. Defense is 30th right now, so, like, you know, that's not happening. But offensively, there's been a lot of promising things. And I think that, especially with Gradey Dick, I mean, he's sort of been, like, the standout for the Raptors. Like,
we've got some numbers here. Okay, so
yeah.
If you look at just guys in their rookie or sophomore year who can match Gradey Dick's usage and efficiency from an effective field goal percentage, so it takes into account 2s and 3s. Mm-hmm. You're looking at Steph Curry in his sophomore year, Karl Anthony Towns, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Chet Holmgren. Like, this combination of usage and efficiency from a guy in their first 2 years is almost unheard of. I tweeted out a stat this morning as well, where if you look at players who have averaged 21-plus points on 60% true shooting in the first 8 games of a season, rookies or sophomore, it is a who's who of Hall of Famers. Like, and we're not saying that's what Grady's going to become, but to your point about, like, him being the standout, this is not just like a normal starter, it's a hot start. This is, like, insane what he's doing.
Will, I watched one of your shows before the season started. I think it was your season preview. And you had mentioned that you were like, the Raptors are watchable.
Yeah.
That was like your line. It's a watchable team.
Just watchable.
And I watched game 1, and I sent Alex a text. And
you had me on the next morning.
Was not
watchable.
I was like, wrong.
When they lost by 30
I was like,
Cavs,
that was the ugliest game. And I sat there watching that game going like, this like might be hell. Like, I don't know how I'm going to, like, I like to pride myself on making sure that I see every single game, even if it is DVR'd. And I thought, there's just no way I'm not going to be able to hit the fast forward button. There's just no way that I'm going to be able to sit through like what I thought that Hornets game was going to be when they were getting blown out.
Yep.
I'm like, so wait, I'm going to have to do a full season of this? I think it's like beyond watchable. I think, like, aside from the injuries, this is perfect. Like,
it's fun.
The RJ Yak pick and roll thing is like genuine fun chemistry.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They suck on D. Like, they're just not good defensively.
Yeah, they're bad.
But they try. And that's what I want to see from a team is, like, they try, like, they dig in. The reason that you think, like, they take all those fouls to me is, yeah, some of it's sloppy play. Like, clearly they're a young team. They make a lot of mistakes. You see guys, like, just kind of make some, like, pretty egregious rookie errors, especially, like, under the basket or, like, biting on fakes. But these are guys that have, like, dug in and that are trying to, like, press, like Davion Mitchell and Jamal Shed, where these guys are, like, trying to pick you up full court. They're not just trying to give you, like, open looks or easy baskets or quitting in basketball games. And then the Gradey thing is, like, this would be something if he was just, like, hot from 3 and it was a stretch of games where he was knocking out. He's scoring at all 3 levels.
Yeah.
Like, they spent all this time talking about, like, hey, this guy has worked on his scoring package in the offseason, and now off the dribble he can shoot more. And, God, how many times have we heard that about scores, right? Like, off the dribble and then it doesn't materialize in something. The way he's going to the basket, like the Lakers game where he struggles out of the gate and you're like, oh, okay, it's normalizing. In the second quarter, he's like, no. Like, I'm sticking with this. I'm still taking my shots. I'm staying confident with it. None of them feel like horrific looks. His, like, he's scoring everywhere on the floor. Like, I'd love to see his shot chart of, like,
it's everywhere. It's literally everywhere.
It's everywhere. And I'm watching it, and literally the only thought that I'm having of it that's, like, any kind of negative is I'm like, I kind of still want, like, I wanted him to take that last shot the other night instead of RJ against Denver. Sure. And I was like, I know it went in and out and it was close, but it's like, if it's a development year, I want to see what this kid can do in those spots. But yeah, what does happen when Quickley and, like, Scotty come back and you've got this guy who's playing this way and this incredibly at this kind of a volume? Yeah, how do you sort of mix it in? So I'm, and it's perfect because they're losing too, and I'm on
Sure,
like Team
you
Tank.
want them
Like,
to.
I don't want to play in games, so it's like they're in these games with Denver where they're scrapping their way to the finish, and then it's like 1 point loss. I'm like, heaven, good night.
I think Gradey's only going to help Scotty and quickly, Scotty especially with all the movement and the shooting and stuff. Real quick before I let you guys go, I do want to know your thoughts on whether you think this front office has got its mojo back. And the reason I ask that is because when I start looking at the way, like from a scouting and player development standpoint, when I start looking at the way RJ Barrett immediately started playing his best basketball of his career when he got here, when I think about Gradey Dick's year-to-year improvement, when I think about the fact that the Raptors got multiple immediately playable rookies out of the worst draft class in over a decade when they didn't even have their own pick, when I start thinking about all those things, it starts to give me, have me reminiscing about the 2015 to 20 Raptors when it really felt like they could do no wrong when it came to scouting, player development, and all that. So real quick, before I let you guys get out of here, do either of you believe that this front office has its mojo back, or is it? Have you seen too much to believe that yet?
This is a really great front office. Like, I think that like the last couple of years have maybe clouded that fact because of the team just wasn't working out. But it actually wasn't a bad collection of talent. Like, you're telling me you have Fred, Pascal, OG, and Scotty Barnes. Like, that's a really good 4 that you can try to build off of. It just didn't click. The other thing too, especially now that I'm thinking about it, is this front office fundamentally has always been a draft and develop team. That's been really good about them. And number one, I don't think they had a developmental coach in Nick Nurse. He just never liked playing young guys and would literally always play his vets 40 minutes. And the number 2 thing is there was also the pandemic, which really did screw up a lot of scouting in terms of both like from young players trying to like train and get good, and also from actually scouting networks going around and the coaching that all went into it. I think there was a huge disruption for like 2 to 3 years. And especially for a team that lives and dies on this, I think that affected the Raptors a little bit more than usual. But they've hit on a lot of stuff recently, and that's what's encouraging about sort of going forward.
I need more time. Like, I'm fresh off the Siakam trade, which to me was
the lowest point. That was rock bottom.
Tough.
It was just such a disaster because there wasn't a single person that didn't see the writing on the wall with that, and their inability to act and wait for so long, I think, is really damning. I also, like we were just talking about Damian Lillard, this is a front office that was like, I don't know, you would know this better than I would, the credibility of those.
They made some real calls.
They were seriously inquiring and trying to like pivot in that direction. They felt like they couldn't pick a lane for a very, very long time, and they couldn't accept that they needed to take a step back to take a step forward. And like to your point about how this has always been a draft and development team, that's one of the things that really frustrated me about watching the last couple of years of the Raptors is that they like kind of pushed away against that identity. That's why the Jakob Poeltl trade drove me nuts too. It's like, no man, first round picks are worth more to you, the Toronto Raptors, than they are the Miami Heat. Like, you can't do business the same way. And so even though Yak is, a fine body for this team and is going to help with the development of those guys, it was tough to think in a year where Victor Wembanyama is in it that, you were going to sacrifice a first round pick even if it had a low percentage chance of going into the lottery. I can't give mojo back yet, but I can say that like this, like, you ever go to a movie and you don't expect it to be any good, like the Rotten Tomato score is low, and then you actually enjoy it, and so you're like, this movie has like a special place in my heart. That's kind of the Raptors for me right now. It's like I expected the Cleveland game right out of the gate.
Every game.
I didn't think that any of this was going to be necessarily happening, and so I think it's like we're really trending towards a very positive direction where it's like they're watchable again, like they're what you predicted that they would be, and there are things that you can hope on. There are things that you can dream on. Now it does become an interesting conversation, how Scotty Barnes and Gradey Dick fit together and what quickly looks like, and will he lower, the amount of shots he takes in order to be more of a district. Like, these become really cool, fun questions, and so I think it has real potential to get back there. But yeah, I can't do it after, what is it now, 8 games?
Yeah,
it's been 8 games, and they're 2-6, guys.
This
team also blows leads for a living.
But
my goodness,
a good 2-6,
yes,
low at 6,
an encouraging 2-6, a hopeful 2-6, and I honestly, in what everyone thought was a tanking year, that's what you want, a hopeful.
2-6 is their tomato meter.
That's it. That's it. You went in, you looked at the tomato score, 2 out of 6. You're like, that's not very good. 2-6, and then you went in, you're like, oh, that's pretty good.
This panel 6-2, 6-2 panel.
Wow,
that's pretty good.
80% or more on Rotten Tomatoes. 100%.
That's my attendance on these shows.
Yeah, well, first time, 3-time guest.
3-time, baby.
Yeah, nice.
Come
first
on now.
one hit it. JD will definitely have you back on.
Thanks,
thanks to both of you for
great.
joining us. You can listen to the Hello and Welcome podcast with Will and Alex. Anywhere you get your podcast, you can listen to JD on Sportsnet Fan 590, Monday to Friday, every morning, 9 to 11 Eastern Time.
Yeah, 9 to 11. You also get the podcast, JD Bunkis podcast.
There you go. For now, though, I want to get back to the main topic of today's show, which is Joel Embiid and all the drama kind of surrounding him and that altercation with the Sixers. And to do that, I'm going to bring in Yaron Weitzman, NBA reporter and author of Tanking to the Top, the Philadelphia 76ers, and the most audacious process in the history of professional sports. All right, Yaron, I mean, we've been talking about it all day here, the Joel Embiid drama that's going on in Philly. I know there's always some sort of Joel Embiid-related drama, but this time it's definitely taken on more of a serious tone with him reportedly shoving Marcus Hayes in a locker room confrontation. What can you tell us about what you know or what you've heard about this situation? I know we've all read the stories and seen the tweets that have changed over time. So what do you hear about it?
Yes, I wasn't there, though I did get some good jokes when I woke up. That happened to be one of the nights I went to sleep early. You know, every now and then you call a night early, and I woke up the next day, and a lot of friends seem to enjoy saying, "Oh, are you okay?" I assume this was you, things like that, because Joel has I've not always been his favorite. So I was not there. I guess I have a few thoughts on this. One, and I think the overarching idea here is like, yeah, there's an Embiid story and how he reacted, but it's just part of the greater Sixers story to me of the season and them being, 1-5 now, whatever the record is, right? Not very good to begin the year. And I just, maybe I'm wrong. I find it hard to believe that if the Sixers are playing well, that this story, that he gets as frustrated by the narrative and that it's, the column is written, and just that all these things that are happening now to me sort of derive from the fact that the Sixers have gotten off to this really bad start to the season.
Yeah, I mean, we were showing a stat earlier in the show when we were talking about how bad Milwaukee's been, but Milwaukee and Philly are 2 of 4 or 5 teams in the league right now that rank bottom 10 on both ends of the court. Like, they are straight up bad. At least in the Sixers, I guess, defense, they have been missing 2 of their top 3 players. I know PG came back last night. You did mention your Embiid's also not your biggest fan. What's the history there? Just being critical of him and him not liking it?
Yeah, so it's actually it's a little unfair. So I've covered the Sixers. I do a little less now, but I was there for the beginning, from the process years. I wrote the book on it. And one of the things I did is I did this story on Chick-fil-A, right? The Sixers have a tradition where rookies bring Chick-fil-A onto the team flight. And somehow, I don't even know how I did this, right? But I somehow convinced Landry Shamet / the Sixers to allow me to accompany him on his Chick-fil-A run before a flight. The whole thing was funny because then Shamet was like not into it and he kind of tried to blow me off, and I kind of ended up staking out in the parking lot looking for his car to come, and he didn't tell me he was there. So then I go knock on the window or whatever. I get in there and he's getting the order, and he's got a separate order for Embiid. And the separate order is 4 chicken sandwiches, 4 fries, 4 shakes, 4 sodas. I think so. It's written somewhere. That was for Bleacher Report back in the day. He tells me like, this is for Embiid. This is from Embiid's guy. Like it's very clear it's for Embiid. This was about 2018, right? Something like that. Embiid got very upset that was put in I did a story on it and it was put in the book, and just Embiid got very upset about how that was making him appear. And honestly, it's a similar theme to what we're dealing with now, right? The idea of being probably a little sensitive to criticism, which again, like I feel weird I am also sensitive to criticism, right? And a little too private with his the way they share his injury stuff, I think has been a mistake. And I think there's just a simple PR way to have fixed this. And the fact that it's happened for so many years for Joel Embiid would seem to indicate, I don't know, but like Brett Brown, Daryl Morey, Sam Hinkie, Brian Colangelo, Jerry Colangelo, and Elton Brand, I find it hard to believe that all these people have approached how do we describe Joel Embiid's injury in the same way. Like there's one constant there, and that's Embiid. So clearly there's some kind of, for some reason, he likes being vague about his injuries. And so now Embiid and I are good now, and we were fine. But there was, back in the day, he was a little annoyed.
Yeah, hopefully his Chick-fil-A orders have decreased a little in terms of quantity.
I think they probably have.
Yeah, I'd hope so. Or else some of the criticism's definitely valid. You mentioned how you would maybe like handle it better, how you think it could be handled better when it comes to all of this constant miscommunication around his injuries. What do you think that solution is? I mean, it's easy to say, well, he can just be healthy, but if he's not going to be consistently healthy and it doesn't seem like his body will ever allow him to, what do you think the solution is for communicating it better. I don't know what the way to word this is.
I know, I agree with you. So I think what you said, the second part there is really important, right? I think it's key to understand for Sixers fans, NBA fans, everyone, right? This is clearly the reality, right? Whatever, I don't remember the amount of procedures, but just on the knee, I'm not even talking about the orbital, like the freak injuries, like the orbital fracture and stuff that is really out of his control, right? But just he's a big man and he's had a lot of issues to his knees and a lot of procedures done on that. I believe it's a left knee, right? 50-50 shot. So like to me, it's clear that this is just going to be the reality. And we see it's ironic that Paul George is involved because it's sort of similar to the Kawhi stuff in a way. But like, so to me, it's just, okay, the injury, somebody, maybe it's him or probably him or somebody else saying, yeah, this is just where I'm at now. My goal is to be healthy for the playoffs. This is why I've had a lot of procedures done on my knee. It's not always 100%. Sometimes I can wake up with it every day and who knows what's going on. And that's just going to be the case. And I really think, maybe I'm naive, I think there'd be a segment that wouldn't, but I think most people, Sixers fans, NBA fans, I think people would accept that. I really do. I do. Again, I think people respond to honesty and candor. And he just, for whatever reason, it's clear that that's something he just doesn't want to do.
Yeah, and it's funny. I mean, you mentioned the Kawhi, the connection with PG there as well, but like a couple of weeks ago, we talked about this on the show too, and even with Kawhi about how I think much easier people and Clippers fans would receive this if it came from a point of honesty as opposed to coming from a point of the Clippers saying in July that he was treated unfairly by being sent home from Team USA camp, only for then 3 months later he still hasn't had any contact work. Like, just I understand they can't be honest about his full medical history. That's fine. But there should be some more honesty and clarification when it comes to like their current status. And you make a point there as well about how it's received by Philly fans. And I wanted to ask you that because I know you're in New York, but obviously your history covering the Sixers, writing the book, you also have your finger on the pulse of Sixers fans, I think. So I wanted to ask you, from your vantage point, does it seem like Philly is rallying around Embiid in this case because of how unfairly people viewed the criticism in that column, with regards to the references to his son and his deceased brother? Or does it seem the opposite to you that maybe his act is starting to wear thin, even among Philly fans?
No, I think it's more the first thing you said. I mean, there's a line there, right? And this dates back to the process, right? And I think it started off probably more 50-50, and over the years it's tilted more towards pro process and Embiid. But and one of the things I found so fascinating about this, sort of the delineation between how people consume sports, how people act as fans and what they're interested in, right? And the process was really interesting because we basically had this line of the old school fan who reads the columns the day after and listens to sports radio, and Philly sports radio is great, especially now, but maybe more the old school sports radio, where you hammer the guys and say they suck, and you come home after a long day of work and just want to see the team win and all that stuff, versus the new age fan, which I think is more what you and I grew up in. And people came up in the age of Moneyball and fantasy sports, and I approach this from how a GM thinks of things, and this is what I would do, and this makes sense to winning a championship. And the process, you saw those lines. That was sort of the Cold War between the two sets of fandoms. And I think most have kind of come around on that, or at the point of seeing how good Joel Embiid is, or not good, how great, fantastic he is. So I think most Sixers fans are with him. I think there's probably some frustration just from the communication standpoint. And again, it goes back to what we started, that this season has sucked to begin with. It's just been bad. And just, it's not even like they're losing, but they're unwatched, at least before last night. They were unwatchable, these games. And it's unwatchable, and you're saying, wait, I thought we signed Paul George, and wait, Embiid was in the Olympics. That's the other part hanging over all of this too, right? That he was in the Olympics. And that's the other curveball question here that hasn't really been answered. It's like, so you're in the Olympics, you're good enough there, but now you're not, but you didn't re-injure your knee, but the knee's hurting now. Just all this confusion. It goes back to what I was saying. I really think so much of this would be cleared if there was just some candor. All that being said, referencing, I assume people know the column by now, like referencing dead brothers and things like that is unnecessary. And I actually think, like, the column, I might disagree with it. It was fair game except for that, right? It's fair game to criticize Embiid not playing. Yep. Just don't do that part.
Yeah. Last Embiid question before we get into a little more general Sixers talk. I know that column also kind of insinuated that he didn't show up to camp in the best shape. From what you've heard, like, was that a thing, or was it just that his knee wasn't right? Or from what you've heard, were there genuine concerns about his conditioning in camp?
I didn't hear any issues about that. Doesn't mean it wasn't the case, right? I didn't hear any issues of that. I will say two things. One, I don't think Marcus Hayes, good columnist. He's not like an on the, he's not a reporter with he's making calls on it every day. Which I'm not saying he made that up, right? I don't know that, but he's not somebody who's there around the team every day and connected in the organization that way. The other thing I will say though is Embiid historically has struggled with maintaining conditioning while being injured, which sounds dumb and like obviously it's hard, but different players are able to do that, are more effective with that, and that's been a struggle of his. We've seen it. He comes back from these long stretches, in April or whatever, these long absences, and he's just very much out of shape. And for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, it's just he probably wasn't the hardest worker, and that's been an issue. So it's possible if the knee's preventing him from doing cardio and things like that. But I didn't hear anything specifically on that front.
And with respect to that, just terrible start we've both referenced now for the team. Again, the built-in excuse is that, listen, we're missing our best player who's an MVP caliber superstar. We're missing our prized off-season pickup who's only played one game. But from what you've seen, do you think there are reasons to be concerned about this team even at full strength? Or maybe is the concern just that there's not really reason to believe this team will ever be at full strength for long enough?
That, to me, it's more the second part, right? So, listen, they have 11 new players. I think that's the total, right? 11 new players. A lot of these guys are built in, and why I thought they had a great offseason. And I love the signings like Caleb Martin and bringing back Kyle Lowry and Andre Drummond and all these things. And the reason I thought, and I think most people thought those guys were good, is because, great role players, right? Those are guys who are great in their roles, surrounding superstars. Take away two of those three stars, and suddenly the great role players are not able to level up. And there are different guys in the NBA. There's some guys who are good role players who can level up in certain ways. This group is not that. So to be honest, I'm working through it myself, right? Because part of me is like, no, the whole thing is they need to just get in the playoffs. Don't be a playing team. Be a top 5-6 team. Be healthy. This roster is fantastic, healthy. But if we're also saying that, Embiid is going to be a 45-game guy, 50-game guy going forward, which very well could be the case, right? Then you probably do have to figure out a way to win more games without him, which sounds like duh. But you got to avoid the play-in. It's too hard, and you want to avoid those low seeds where you're facing off against, let's say, Boston in round one, too early. So I think it's valid to be concerned. The Paul George thing will be the interesting part to me. Let's see how he looks, and he's the insurance there, where he's good enough to be your number one. If he's your number one guy or 1A with Maxey, you're not winning a championship. But I do think with the infrastructure they have around those guys, that's enough to win enough regular season games to sort of hold the line until Embiid's around.
Yeah, and that was the thing. It's great that you reference it like that. He's the insurance, because even when they signed him, that was a big thing for me too. And I talked about how and wrote about how it fits so well from a basketball standpoint with him, between Maxey and Embiid, but even from a durability standpoint and the way him and Embiid can both age, the fact that they are there for each other should help both of them, right? In terms of easing the burden on Embiid, PG being able to maybe ease into a secondary, tertiary role. But if both of them are out, then it kind of defeats the purpose, right? Because now that burden's just on Tyrese Maxey. And even in Paul George's case, I know last year was his healthiest season in, 5 or 6 years. I think he played 74, 72 games. He's already missed almost the same amount of games this year through 2 weeks than he did all of last year. So, yeah, to your point, if that insurance policy isn't there, it kind of nullifies the rest of this stuff, and you have role players and 30-whatever-year-old Kyle Lowry. I'm sitting here in Toronto, trust me, we love Kyle Lowry, and he's still a very, net positive player when he's on the court, but he should not have the responsibilities that he might be tasked with on this team without Paul George and Joel Embiid.
I completely agree. And it's important to remember they still have, I forget the exact, but they have assets, they have picks to go out and get somebody. And Daryl Morey is very much a believer in, roster day one is not anything close to what your roster when you're entering the playoffs is. And I think we could see if they're saying, you know what, we need more firepower just to get to the regular season to make sure we have enough wins under our belt. They can use some of those picks for that stuff. But yeah, to me, this next stretch with George, let's see if that sort of snaps everyone into place in a different way. It kind of gets Kelly Oubre back clicking a little bit. And by Maxey, you saw a difference last night with Maxey. his percentages were awful in the first few games. It wasn't because of him. There's no space. He's the only guy who can create a shot off the dribble. Last night, you see, it wasn't particularly good last night, and it still opened up all sorts of things for Maxey. So let's see what happens here.
Yeah, just last thing that you mentioned George not being great last night. I know he missed the shot at the end there. Think it's just like rust, he'll be fine? Anything concerning from that opening night, or just kind of a guy who's missed a lot of time trying to acclimate himself to a new team and all that?
Yeah, that sounds right to me. I mean, I thought that was he admitted also that he took a bad shot at the end. Yeah. That was a weird possession. I mean, I think Maxey should have had the ball there anyway. That whole possession was weird, but I think it's just rust. Like Paul George is great. And again, what makes him special is that he's probably like the best number 2 guy, but who can also level up to number 1 when needed, especially in the regular season. And that's what makes him such a perfect fit. And it's why, like, we're all, as just a basketball fan, I want to see these 3 guys on the court together and see what it looks like.
100%. I've been saying that, like, it's as balanced a big 3 as we've seen in a long time, because a lot of times now you get these big 3s that there's a lot of like skill duplication and kind of diminishing returns because of that, but these guys, they just fit so well together, and I'm with you. I just want to see it. And the benefit for Philly, as you mentioned, unlike the Bucks, who we talked about earlier on the show, who are they're closer to just being completely boned because they have no assets, no picks till 2031. The Sixers actually are in a really advantageous position considering how much talent they already have. Teams with that much talent don't also usually have the assets the Sixers have. So I'm not ready to panic quite yet about this team the way I am about a Milwaukee, or to be honest, even like a Denver or something like that.
I completely agree. And Maxey, right? Maxey's a key part there, where you have this young star too. You're not everyone. The rest of the team is old as hell, but you have a young star there. And I agree. And Daryl Morey has talked about this. Like, they were he's joked that like the Thunder are the most well-positioned team in NBA history. But other than that, like, there aren't many examples of teams who have the sort of players they do, and also the asset capital, draft capital, you want to call it, that they have. So yeah, I think this was not what the roster will look like come playoff time. But the Embiid stuff is definitely worth monitoring for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Yaron, thanks so much for joining us, man. Let the people know where they can find your work before you go.
Yeah, you can check it out. Twitter is the best place, or X, whatever we're calling it these days, right? Fox Sports, all that good stuff. And look over my shoulder here. You can check out if you want to learn more about the Sixers.
All right. Yaron, thanks so much for joining us, man. Really appreciate your time. Hope to have you on again this season. For Yaron Weitzman, for JD Bunkis and Will Liu, who joined us earlier, for Zach in the control room, my name is Joseph Casciaro. This has been the Unfiltered Show. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.